Gold and Blue Dude here with you again. If you haven't already, go ahead and like and subscribe to my channel. I come out with videos every single game, sometimes 2 or 3 depending on how active the day and what kind of mood I'm in. So if you didn't like this video, maybe you'll like the next. So today I want to talk about what's going on in college football. Well, we already know that the Ivy League is canceled, Big Ten and Pac-12 shrunk to non-conferences. So what I did is I went through the schedule to see just exactly what games will be missing, the bigger games. So I went through everybody's schedule and picked out the big games that I thought that were going to be played that are not going to be played. So here we go. First we're going to talk about the Pac-12. We'll start from the bottom and go to the top. So first we have the Pac-12 South, and the bottom was Arizona. So the best game that Arizona was going to play that we're not going to get to see was actually a Big 12 game, in my opinion, and that was the Arizona at Texas Tech. So this is a little bit of an interest to me because Texas Tech is in Big 12. Now both of these teams terrible. Texas Tech terrible, Arizona terrible, but you know, that's the best game that I could come up with. Next we move up to Colorado, and I think that Colorado and at Texas A&M could have been an interesting game. I think Texas A&M is a much better team, but it could have been, you know, just interesting to watch even in the beginning. So next we have Arizona State. Arizona State, I think the BYU at Arizona State game is the biggest one we're going to miss. I think BYU is an up and coming, and Arizona State has been doing much better under Herm Edwards. So I thought BYU at Arizona State was the biggest one for Arizona State. Then we move up to UCLA. They really didn't have much of a good non-conference. They had New Mexico State at home, at Hawaii, at San Diego State. I guess UCLA at Hawaii? I don't know. So let's move past UCLA, although I do think UCLA was going to take a big jump this year in college football. They're looking really good under Chip Kelly. Next we have USC. Well, the first one is the neutral site against Alabama. I was very interested in that game. But also we forget that Notre Dame was supposed to go to USC. So we actually missed 2 good games with USC being in the Pac-12 and the Pac-12 shrinking down to only conference. So now let's move up to Utah. Well, the thing that jumps out to me is, of course, the Holy War. And that was going to be BYU at Utah. Last year, it was a good game. I thought Utah was a much better team. But since it was at BYU, it became a great game. It's a rivalry. I thought this year it would have been a good game too. So let's go to the Pac-12 North. We'll start off with Stanford. Yes, they finished last in the Pac-12 North. So Stanford, of course I'm going to say at Notre Dame. For Stanford, it's at Notre Dame. But also, another independent, BYU was supposed to go to Stanford. So we're missing 2 potential good games. But of course, Stanford not looking good. Let's move up to Washington State. And so Washington State, maybe a little bit of interest when they went to Utah State or hosting Houston. Not really eye-catching, but probably would have been interesting, especially with that Houston game at home. Under Dana Holgorsen, maybe that would have been a lot of offense we would have seen. All right, next we move up to Washington. Of course, the game I'm going to pick is Michigan at Washington. This could have been a big win for Jim Harbaugh in trying to keep his job at Washington, or at Michigan, going to Washington. Well, the game's not going to happen, so he's going to have to do it in the Big Ten and, of course, against Ohio State. So now I'm going to move on to Cal. Nothing really pops out except for TCU was supposed to go to Cal. Of course, TCU is in the Big 12, and I thought TCU was going to be a better team this year. And Cal could have been a tricky place for TCU. Well, guess what? They don't have to worry about it now. Let's move on to Oregon State. What? Wait, Oregon State finished tied for 2nd in the Pac-12 North? Yes, they did. True story. So I believe the best game we're not going to see out of Oregon State was going to be Oregon State at Oklahoma State, another Big 12 team who I thought has the talent to win the Big 12. But Oregon State at Oklahoma State could have been a decent matchup. We'll never know. Then we move on to the top of the totem pole in the Pac-12 North, and that, of course, is Oregon. Of course, we know that Ohio State and at Oregon game could have been massive, massive playoff implications. You know, Pac-12's only hope of getting into the playoffs possibly. Well, guess what? They're not going to get to prove it against Ohio State. That's not going to happen. But also, North Dakota State going to Oregon could have been a decent game to watch as well to start off the season. Now we move on to the Big Ten. We will start off with Rutgers. I know Rutgers terrible, but guess what? They did have a matchup at Syracuse. Old Big East rivals. Might have been an interesting game. Let's move on to Maryland. This one hits home. Maryland was supposed to go to West Virginia. My team. Not going to happen. Could have been an extra win for West Virginia. But guess what? It's not going to happen now. Alright, let's move up to Michigan State. I think Michigan State at BYU would have been pretty interesting. But a bigger game, Miami at Michigan State, it might have given Michigan State a chance to upset a talented Miami team. So now we're going to move on to Indiana. Yes, Indiana finished above Michigan State last year. Weird, huh? So for Indiana, nothing really. I guess I'll pick Indiana at UConn. I don't know. Let's move on to Michigan. Of course, we talked about the Michigan going to Washington game. Other than that, I don't see anything else. And like I spoke about when I talked about Washington, it was a chance for Jim Harbaugh to get a win right off the bat. Maybe secure his job a little more. Well, it's not going to happen. Let's move on to Penn State. Penn State was supposed to go to Virginia Tech this year. I think that would have been a very interesting matchup and a possible upset alert for Penn State going to Blacksburg, possibly a night game. Not going to happen. Then we move on, of course, to Ohio State. And besides that game at Oregon, like I mentioned before when I was talking about Oregon, not much meat on the bone. So we'll stick with Ohio State at Oregon for theirs as well. And then the last little bit of the Big Ten, we have Northwestern. Yeah, I don't see much of anything. Maybe Central Michigan at Northwestern. I don't know. I don't see much. Let's talk about Nebraska. I do think that Cincinnati at Nebraska could have been a potentially explosive game to watch. Not going to happen, but man, I was actually looking forward to that game. Anyways, one can only dream. So let's move up to Purdue. They have several interesting games. I mean, they get Air Force at home. They go to Boston College. They get Memphis at home. Maybe Purdue at Boston College. Might have been interesting. So let's move on to Illinois. I don't see much of anything for Illinois. I mean, they get UConn at home, or was supposed to get UConn at home, Illinois State at home, Bowling Green State at home. No, I don't see much there. Then, moving on to Iowa. Oh yeah, the rivalry, Iowa State at Iowa. I actually look forward to that game every year, and it's pretty close. You can tell it's a rivalry because even when one team is, much better than the other, they play each other closely. So I will actually miss that game. And Iowa State's in the Big 12, so it would have had some implications for West Virginia. Maybe helped us out a little bit if Iowa were to beat Iowa State. I don't know. So let's move on to last year's Cinderella, Minnesota. They do get BYU at home, so that would have been a fairly interesting matchup, but we won't get to see it. And then, of course, Wisconsin. And besides the Notre Dame game, they also got Appalachian State at home. So we missed Appalachian State at Wisconsin, and then Notre Dame versus Wisconsin in Lambeau Field. Yes, we don't get to see that. So besides all those games, there's actually 5 schools that might be SOL this year, and you all know what that stands for. The Independents. Yeah, everybody wants to talk about Notre Dame. They're actually in talks with the ACC, trying to extend their affiliation, maybe fill in their holes with more ACC games. What about the other independents? Who are they? Liberty, BYU, Army, New Mexico State, and UMass. All 5 of those teams might be SOL this year and not get to play football if all the regular conferences decide to stick with this conference-only game schedule. So there you go. There's my list of important games that we're not going to get to see. And that's just so far. All these other conferences might do the same thing, and then we'll have a ton of games, a ton of good games that we won't get to see. So the list probably will get bigger. Hey, that's all I have for you today. Like and subscribe if you haven't already. And like I said, if you didn't like this video, maybe you'll like the rest. Something like that. I'll see you on my next show.